Okay, so welcome everyone and thank you for participating. I would like to note that in addition to being recorded, today's session is also being live streamed on YouTube. We will be starting today's meeting with a land acknowledgement led by Christina.
Thanks. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and is within the territory of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We have one agenda item for today's session, the Queen's Park North Revitalization. This is a city project and it's a concept review and it's the first review of this project. There's 1 hour and 40 minutes scheduled for the review. It's a formal review session with a vote taken at the end. Staff have been given 15 minutes for their presentation. This will be followed by a 25-minute presentation from the consultant and discussion will follow the presentations. To repeat, the session is being live streamed on YouTube and is also being recorded. And the recording will also be available on the City Planning YouTube channel following the meeting. So now I will do a roll call, starting with Gordon.
Here, no conflict.
Okay, thank you. And next, Jim Goff.
Here, no conflict.
Okay, thank you. And Olivia?
Here.
Okay, and Sibylla?
Here, no comment.
Okay, Paul?
No conflict.
Okay, and Jim Melvin?
Present, no conflict.
Okay, and Joe? Okay, and Ralph has excused himself. And I'd also like to welcome Pat Hansen and Mark Halle from the University of Toronto Design Review Panel.
Joe's
And have I missed? Oh, Joe? Hi, are you here and do you have any conflicts?
No conflicts, I'm here.
Okay, great, thank you. And did I miss anybody?
Mark Hill.
Oh, Mark, is that a hand up from before, or did you have a comment right now?
It's from before.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So, okay, thanks. So some reminders before we get started for panel members. Don't forget the staff questions that we have been given. 5 questions, and to provide commentary on issues of concern and appreciation. And we'll be given a 1-minute verbal sign to wrap up the presentations for both. And we can start with the staff presentation first, please. Thank you. Uh-oh.
Okay, no, that's you're just sharing screen here. Thanks. Didn't everyone see that name? Okay. Thanks very much for having us today. I'm Dave O'Hara, manager of park design with the city, and here with Paul Parrish, our director in parks planning, and Shannon Lawrence, the senior project manager for the project. Shannon's going to walk you through one of our sort of introductory slides. But before we do that, just off the top, this is unprecedented. The city of Toronto having such a wonderful opportunity, getting a donation from the Westons to take a look at Queen's Park North. Not only the donation towards physical improvements to the park itself, but their interest in making sure that there's funding available for ongoing operations and maintenance, so we can do so much more with Queen's Park North than we've done in the past from a maintenance perspective. And that does also allow us to make sure that we're setting up a collaborative governance model for the park, working closely with UT and the donor, and making sure that there's a team that's more hands-on with this park than we're able to do elsewhere in the city. We did obviously, sorry, if you don't know, the project went to executive committee yesterday. We wanted to advance the process of accepting the donation itself. We knew we actually had additional work to do with the design team to refine and take into account everything we've heard from the public and others when it comes to what you're going to see today. So we haven't done that yet, but that's part of our next step. We've heard a lot about the protecting the trees, about the cultural heritage of the park, and so we've got a good team assembled to make sure that we're taking a close, careful look at all of that. But more work to do. We will be reporting back to the city's Infrastructure and Environment Committee in May. And we certainly expect that we'll be back in front of the design review panel again. We wanted to get some early advice and input into where we're headed, just so that we can take all that into account as we move forward. So.
Thank you. Great. So as Dave noted, the project came to the city in 2024 from a very generous offer from the Weston family for $50 million to improve the park, plus additional funding for long-term maintenance. So that's outlined in our report that went to executive yesterday. It amounts to approximately 40 to 50 million additional to the capital funding over a 20-year period. And so in response to that, in March 2025, staff received direction from council to continue advancing the project along the donation acceptance terms, as well as an implementation update. So happy to say we've completed our second step of that council report back yesterday. We went to executive committee. Our report was adopted with some amendments, including the report back in May, and a report back along the terms and conditions of the terms and condition of a community advisory, community advisory body, as well as our Indigenous stewardship table. Staff will also continue to work through finalizing that full donation acceptance agreement, as well as the tri-party funding maintenance agreement, and working through any changes with the University of Toronto on the lease. So to note, Queen's Park North is a 5.2 hectare park. It's located just north of the provincial legislature. It is under a 999-year lease with the University of Toronto. So any changes do require an amendment to that lease. It is recognized by the Downtown Parks and Life Study as having high potential for investment, as well as through the parkland strategy designated as a city park. It has some current assets within the park, including a renovation that took place, completed in 2019. So some recent upgrades, which also focused on improving the park's trees and ecology at that time. And I wanted to just start with our vision and principles for the project. So early on in the visioning process, the city team, together with the consultant team and the donors, developed a set of vision and principles that would guide the design directions and the public engagement process. And so the vision really focuses on the existing trees and heritage as key priorities and principles within that vision. And there's an accompanying 7 principles that frame the design development. I would note that we added for our last round of engagement the cultural heritage principle, which was always a part of our vision, but we heard very clearly for our last round of engagement that needed to be embedded even more strongly within the project principles. So that was added through that phase of engagement. We also see this as an opportunity to really implement some of the vision and strategy for the parkland strategy, which looks at expanding, connecting, investing, and including more people in our parks. The site is surrounded by several cultural and educational neighbors, as well as the Legislative Assembly, which helps inform some of the opportunities that we're looking at in this park, including this opportunity to add an appropriately scaled level of programming and amenities into the park. And the project does start with the trees. So there are over 350 trees in this park. It has framed the way that the team has looked at the site from the very beginning and really trying to ensure that all of the changes and interventions within the site are done really sort of delicately working with the trees. I do like the way our colleagues at JRS say that the project happens because of the trees, not in spite of them. And I think that has really been a fundamental value of the project from the beginning. The park has several assets within it, as I noted. So there is public art, there's a perimeter path, a bottle filling station, and some current seating. We are proposing that we would add additional layers of flexible seating within the park. There is the inclusion of a tree walk structure, a cafe restaurant structure in the center of the park, a formal garden to the south, and I'll leave it to Todd and Jessica to walk through those plans more fully. The site was, or the park was looked at early on, even preceding this project in 2015 by ERA, who did a heritage impact assessment for the park that framed the previous round of work on the site. And so that was the starting point for which cultural heritage on the site was looked at. It was further developed then through the historic context statement, which ERA developed in 2025. And that statement really looks to lean on the work that was done previously, but also takes into consideration some of the changes that have happened both within the park, but also at a policy and strategy level, and the way that the city sort of approaches public space in a different way than was done at the time. So the next step of that process is that the city has asked ERA to develop a statement of significance that would outline the values and attributes of the park that would help frame and look at the design as we continue to move forward, and would also help guide any future changes on the site. They've also outlined a number of heritage characteristics, which they've put into themes, and Todd and Jessica will walk us through those themes. But looking at the idea of the park being a welcoming and democratic space, the park being, of course, the people's park, and offering sort of a lot of opportunities for these overlapping uses within the space. So within Toronto's official plan, it really treats parks as spaces that are essential to city building elements, and really aims to protect, enhance, expand, and integrate parkland to support livability and health of communities and of neighborhoods. The project is informed by many city strategies and policies. We, of course, look to the TO Core and Parkland strategies to help as we think through how to work within Queen's Park North. We also look at the parkland strategy in terms of the impacts of growth that will be happening throughout the city, but in particularly downtown. Downtown is, of course, in terms of parkland provision, faces both the challenge of increasing density and low provision. And so the strategy lays out that anything under 12 meters squared parkland is considered low, and under 4 meters squared would be considered very low. And so when we look at Queen's Park North, we see it as having a sort of a within a neighborhood that would have a low to very low parkland provision. And so we really need to think about how that park can accommodate multiple types of uses, especially as the neighborhood continues to densify. And so when we think about how to plan for that growth and how parks can adapt and create high value spaces, Parks and Recreation looks at a number of important considerations that ensure this high value creation of parks. And so within Queen's Park North, the way that we're thinking through that is really looking to balance the protection of the trees and the character of the park through some of the softscape improvements that Todd and Jessica will walk us through, but also looking at how we can add appropriately scaled amenities at the heart of the park that would offer more opportunities and varied uses and overall improve visitor experience for more people. The project's also guided by the downtown plan, the Parks and Public Realm plan, and the University of Toronto St. George secondary plan. So that leads us to sort of the key questions and areas for feedback that we'd like to ask the panel for. Really looking for at this conceptual stage, general input and advice on the concepts that are going to be presented today, and input on the washroom and cafe location, as well as the degree to which the panel sees the proposal considering both the civic nature and use of the park, as well as the park as a site for gathering and demonstration. The input to which the degree to which the proposal responds to and integrates the cultural heritage, and as well as the concept and location of the tree walk structure.
You're ahead of time, I think, so.
Yeah.
That never happens.
10 minutes.
Okay.
All right, so I think we can now move on to the proponent presentation. So. So you guys have 25 minutes, but we're running ahead of schedules.
Thank you, appreciate that. All right, hi everyone. As many of you know, I'm Jessica Hutchin, partner at Janet Rosenberg and Studio Landscape Architects. And with me today is Todd Douglas, and we're gonna take you through the current draft of the evolving concept plan for the Queen's Park North Revitalization Project. So as mentioned, we're sort of in the middle of phase 3 of engagement, and we continue to be hearing from focus groups, surveys, public meetings, neighboring institutions like ROM and the RCM and U of T, meetings with Free Nations, as well as Indigenous sharing circles. So we're really excited to be here today to get your feedback as well. There's a lot to get through, a lot of content, so I'm gonna try to speed through this upfront piece here. So we've got a really incredible team working on the project. Michael McClellan from ERA Architects is here with us today. Shannon told you a little bit about the work that they've been doing, and he's been with us since the beginning of the project. So appreciate you being here, Michael. Thank you. We also have Terrence Radford of Trophic Design, our Indigenous design advisor, as well as Indigenous engagement lead. And we also have Dugan Ecology. You'll see listed. They've completed a character report, ecological character report for the park, which has been very useful. We also have Cohen and Master as our arborists who have inventoried and done analysis on the trees, as well as some sonic tomography on 8 trees of importance. And you'll also notice Belleville was involved in some early ideas around programmatic opportunities. We've got Shim Sutcliffe exploring cafe and washroom design ideas, and Jaw Studio doing a bit of a feasibility study on the workshop structure, which is currently online for the public feedback and input on. And from some recent conversations with the public, again, we might be looking at the addition of maybe a forester, forest ecologist to sort of help as we start to develop like a long-term tree management plan for this park, which is really critical. We've done a lot of background research and analysis to really help us understand the forces acting on this place and how it's become the Queen's Park North that we know today. When we first look at the site, we thought back as far as possible, thinking about when the glaciers left and approximately 12,000 years ago. And we know since then it's really been a place of gathering, travel, and sustenance for Indigenous peoples. It lies in the overlapping traditional territories of the Mississauga, Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat peoples. And the region's really supported sort of a vibrant Indigenous way of being based on harvest, trade, traditional forms of social organization and governance that continue to influence this place today. We've also looked into the colonial history of the park as well, and we'll touch on some of that shortly. We also, to understand sort of the evolution of the park, we've looked at it in terms of sort of evolving, oh, apologies, there's a delay.
That's right.
Yes. Doesn't want to show the timeline slide. Well, we'll skip ahead. You got it. Got it. Yeah. So we look back at the political and cultural context surrounding it. We look at the development of provincial and municipal governments, and we really look at sort of how those impacted what happened. And we look at parks and what parks were meant for and what parks were meant to do for the public. And so what we note in that diagram is sort of how the park has changed over time. It was a place of, rest and nature. It became a place where there were sports like archery and baseball, and there was a bandstand at one point, and then there were concerts and things that we discovered, and they had sort of negative impacts on the routes. So it's really lived a life of various forms. But what we've noticed is the variety and level of activity has declined, and by 2024, despite the renovation project in 2019, the park was suffering from a lack of maintenance and sort of a lack of activation, sort of due to that. And so really paramount to this project is really enhancing that ecological health of the park, beyond that of trees and lawn, and balancing that with the needs and desires of a growing urban population. Just quickly, looking at these images here, we can sort of see how ecologically the park has sort of these scars of sort of human disturbance. The image, I think, on the left is sort of quite indicative of what had happened. This is taken shortly before the park opened in 1860. So we've noticed there's been sort of piecemeal intervention over time and varying levels of care. So then, as mentioned in ERA's recent heritage context statements, 4 themes were identified, and these themes are really important for us because they're rooted in the sustained physical patterns of use on the site and patterns that have shaped this place. I'm not going to go through them in detail here, but what we hope you'll see is how these patterns of use, how these themes have embedded themselves and informed some of the work we've done. I'll pass it over to Todd to take us through those quickly and then get into the plan.
Thanks, Jessica. So I will step through the themes very briefly. Michael's done a lot of work on this, and I'm not going to do it justice, but I hope to just kind of identify a few threads within each theme that we'll pick up as we move into the design. So starting with the people. In 1828, these 3 park lots were acquired by King's College to serve as a site for their future campus. And at the time, the lots were still outside the urban perimeter, and they were characterized by that field and kind of remnant forest cover bisected by Tattle Creek. And then by January 1st, 1859, the University of Toronto leased the land, approximately 20 hectares east of Tattle Creek, to the City of Toronto for use as an urban park to be named Queen's Park. This became the first municipal park in British North America. The public park movement stressed parks were for everyone, for their enjoyment, education, and the experience of nature. And for over 160 years, this park has welcomed many people, including the 2S LGBT+ community, and remains meaningful to that community today, as well as many others. Nature as a anthropogenic space, the decisions of previous generations are written in the landscape. Some trees are older than the park itself, and others of various ages are reflective of the time in which they were planted. So we've worked with ecologists like Dugan to understand how these trees can do make a real contribution to the larger ecological system. So the canopy becomes part of this kind of continuous linkage, popular with birds and other fauna. And generations of Torontonians have enjoyed the park's grounds, which is obviously a tradition which continues to this day. Governance. So Queen's Park North has a significant political history related obviously to the Baldwin Act, which has created the municipal layers of government, the creation of University of Toronto, and the promotion of responsible government in Canada. And it's been a place of protest and demonstrations, as well as a place of stewardship. And finally, welcome. So over the years, many plans have been drawn up and implemented to various degrees, but there's no cohesive authorship to the current park. So some plans show ambitions for botanical gardens, and they even labeled the future University of Toronto site as an experimental farm. The park, over time, developed this path system, which converges at the center where that bandstand and washroom amenity was once located. And today, although large events are not desirable, impromptu performances and things like yoga classes are welcomed. So Queen's Park is a very special place. It was mentioned, it's located in this cluster of Toronto institutions, including the University of Toronto, the legislature, and cultural buildings like the ROM, the Gardner Museum, and the Royal Conservatory of Music. And it's part public square, part university quadrangle. So we'll start with Queen's Park as we know it today. So Queen's Park is known for its large deciduous trees that form a canopy of open lawn crossed by that network of paths converging on that central plaza, today occupied by a sculpture of King Edward VII. It's well used by the public, including large populations of nearby residents, workers, and students, as well as visitors downtown. And it's a popular place for recreation, as well as a thoroughfare for pedestrians. So it's a site of commemoration, social mobilization, and public expression of community identities. And it's also something that I think we've found is become a place that more people walk through than stay. And the park is home to hundreds of trees. And then, as mentioned, some as old as the park itself, and any changes must be sensitive to this context. Compaction from heavy foot traffic and even the subway tunnel below grade puts stress on these trees. And our aim must be to protect the existing mature trees and their root zones while planning for the successive health of the next generation of trees that we hope could live to be 100 years and older. The health and provenance of the existing canopy is varied. So red oaks are the most prevalent species in the park, but followed by Norway maples. So there's significant biodiversity, although much of it is provided by younger specimens, often of just one or two instances. So this understanding of place in trees informed our approach, where we looked at how increasing pressures and disturbances over time have brought us to today, where there's an opportunity to link ecology, investment, and program together and create a park where care for the trees is a program in and of itself. We've also heard loud and clear from the public that care for these trees is of paramount importance, and we're taking that responsibility seriously. So as Shannon did, and we often do, we start by showing the park today. And then I'm going to show our concept and step through a series of moments. It kind of quickly. There's a lot to cover, and I feel like it can feel like a lot, but the intention here is not to overprogram the park, but instead to embed infrastructure to support that moderate and desirable level of programming that's not intended to be happening all at the same time. So our proposed concept plan, canopy remains, continues to define the park and the spaces in between, and the changes are knit within, attempting to maintain what is loved but providing new experiences. We remove the canopy graphically. So here is the concept plan we've shared recently for public feedback. The trees continue to define the park. The paths continue to cross the site and converge at that central plaza. The lightest green remains open lawn. The darker green is new restoration zone planting. A commemorative garden is located at the southern quadrant, and a tree walk meanders through a particularly special stand of mature trees on the left. In the center is that new cafe and washroom structure, an interactive water feature, infrastructure for Indigenous ceremony and governance, as well as flexible spaces for moderate programming. The running path continues to ring the park. We'll start at the center of the park, which we call the heart, and kind of work our way out. For the sake of speed today, I'm going to be using Terrence's notes. So he's here. I'm certainly happy to answer questions, but in Terrence's words, Queen's Park North has functioned as a democratic space for generations. It is also a place where First Nations and Indigenous communities have gathered to speak truth to power. Recognizing this dual history has shaped our design approach. Rather than viewing the park only as a former colonial landscape, we have reframed it through the lens of historic Mississauga Council Fire sites, places of governance, dialogue, and community responsibility. The central axis is reinterpreted not as a tool of colonial order, but as a connector, linking spaces for gathering, dialogue, and shared governance. At its heart, the site becomes a place for community, ceremony, and democratic expression. So we'll get into the specifics, and we'll start by looking at the sculpture, King Edward VII. So Michael's team obviously has helped us kind of unravel the story, but we know that he was installed in Delhi, India in the 20s atop this tall plinth. And as India distanced themselves from their colonial past, the sculpture was sold and purchased by the Jackman family in the late 60s and subsequently donated to the city of Toronto. And then Mr. Jackman noted at the time, he's not really after Edward VII, he was after a great horse. So the horse especially is important. It used to be accessible, like in the image from the 70s, you could kind of sit on the plinth or relax on the slope, and over time, its surrounding became hardened and is now fully surrounded by inaccessible slopes. By moving the sculpture, we make space for people. So historically, the bandstand and washrooms anchored that central plaza, shaped by the landscape around it. And over time, the center became more formalized, and people were pushed out to make way for the sculpture. Our concept wants to bring people back and once again allow the landscape to define the edges. So today, we look up at King Edward on his elevated plinth. In the revitalized heart, we see people are now allowed back in the middle. We have the cafe washroom off to the left, the water feature in front, and the performance platform at right. And the site of council fire infrastructure is in the foreground. So the council fire is sensitively integrated into the park. So in everyday use, the space remains open and accessible. In Terence's words, through ceremony and protocol, the fire can be revealed, transforming the heart into a space of gathering, governance, and community decision-making. The fire is not decorative. It signals responsibility, dialogue, and relationship. The space is intended to support democratic assembly, ceremony, and cultural protocol for events like National Indigenous People Day, National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, and ongoing acts of civic dialogue. King Edward lands in the southwest corner of the site, where it can become part of a key feature of the Wellesley and Queen's Park Crescent East Gateway. The relocation allows the setting of the sculpture to be reconsidered, bringing the horse and plinth down to grade, where the public can more closely interact with it, getting as close to eye level with that horse as we can. This move speaks to the intentions of the original donor and public sentiment, but in a contemporary way. In plan, you can see the space created by moving the sculpture and the way fire is now embedded in the landscape, but not in use. The lawn, kind of if standing near the lawn near Al Purdy, who remains, now blends into the heart, where you have maybe movable furniture mixed with planting, and the water feature is visible beyond. The water feature element anchors the south part of the heart, and the geology of Southern Ontario inspired the topography and materiality of this feature, where kids could interact with water in various forms, be it jets, skim coats, and fog. And if you were standing here, you'd be in front of the cafe and washroom building. The cafe and washroom building has prompted significant public feedback, from concerns to support to questions about operations and servicing. We believe a cafe and washroom can be a welcoming amenity that will serve the park, giving visitors a reason to extend their stay, and should be located where people naturally gather. It aligns with council direction to investigate more food and beverage options in parks, as well as increasing calls for washroom facilities. And this proposed site is centrally located in a clearing free from mature trees and equally accessible from all areas of the park. It's where people naturally gather historically, like they did in the bandstand and washrooms, and it's where the park can best accommodate crowds and services can be accommodated below grade. And it also happens to get the best afternoon sun. Looking at the site up close, we can study the impact on the trees in more detail. The shape is just an idea of how much space it's required, not a building proposal in and of itself. The subway runs north-south on the left-hand side of the site, and it has a buffer around it that has to be a 3-meter buffer that has to be respected. And then there's space for a basement to the right of that buffer, away from existing mature tree roots. And then a few smaller young trees are candidates for transplanting, meaning they be picked up and planted elsewhere. So we'll look at the softscape areas. We've looked to restoration ecology to enhance the park's understory plantings, to improve overall soil health, strengthen habitat, avoid resource-intensive grass mowing management practices, and support a more resilient forest structure for the future. This new understory is intended to reduce pressures on existing trees while creating those conditions for the next generation of trees. And this is a living process that takes time to evolve. The strategy will be supported by an adaptive forest management plan where we're able to care for this ecology over time, adjusting as needed and responding to patterns of use. And watching this restoration planting mature could be a cornerstone experience of the park. In the first year, temporary fencing is installed Maybe a platform becomes the educational interface with interpretive elements. The new understory is planted, the soil is amended, and invasive species are removed. We're also exploring other strategies for ecological enhancements, including managed decay of candidate trees. So these trees might be left in place and monitored, allowing them to provide habitat as they decompose. And eventually, the temporary fence could be removed. The young trees continue to grow as they begin to succeed and replace those that came before them, and the planting is well established. We're showing indicative jumps in time here, not necessarily would take this long, but this is just a time frame we picked. And we look to existing ecological systems that are well suited for our current conditions for inspiration. So we use white oak savanna as a reference system. They once proliferated in southern Ontario, and white oaks are more resistant to oak wilt. And that's what you see in kind of mustard yellow here. A metaphorical forest edge rings the park with more robust species that are maybe shade and salt tolerant. And then there's the learning forest, which is a kind of a special moment with additional plantings inspired by Indigenous companion planting practices. The structure of white oak savanna is unique, with dense meadow understory interspersed with trees, and the youngest of which will eventually replace those existing large mature canopy trees. So the tree walk is this kind of elevated, accessible path that is intended to allow visitors to walk above the understory, near this dense stand of existing mature trees, and taking pressure off those delicate roots. We are studying how this new feature could exist without harming these trees. We're showing a plan here of a potential alignment. The walk weaves around the existing trees, taking care to avoid the tree protection zones that are shown in red. And we're locating footings outside of these zones. And when the tree walk does cross a tree protection zone, it does so in the air, spanning over it. And we're showing these potential footings as minimal kind of slender helical pile type supports. And we show the locations as a range to illustrate our approach to do root exploration work prior to installing. Should we find roots, we adjust the footing location. And we're also looking at creating some small earthworks to minimize confined spaces below. And the alignment itself is being calibrated in coordination with the University Park team. And the bend may one day provide views of University Park and the nearby Zeebeing Garden at U of T's campus. Once on the walk, hovering above the learning forest, Terrence's words, we see opportunity for education, where visitors can learn about plant systems, language, and layered histories. Interpretive signage and storytelling elements will highlight the cultural, ecological, and historical significance of this land, including its role in nourishing both people and ecosystems. We see this walk as a quiet act of respect, protecting the park's existing tree canopy while also inviting people to see themselves as part of a larger relationship with land, with culture, and with care for the future. And the commemorative garden in the South Quadrant references the life and works of the late Hilary Weston. As the Lieutenant Governor from 1997 to 2002, her window in the legislature overlooked this part of the park. And the garden is imagined as a series of rooms with varied character. So the tapestry garden is located closest to the heart and contains various spaces inspired by themes of education, play, gathering, contemplation, and literacy. It has enclosure through maybe medium height fencing and hedging. There's also a labyrinth, a reflecting pool, and what we're calling the fountain garden. Here's an image from the rose garden looking south. So it's intended to be planted lushly, but it's surrounding these kind of small scale spaces with a mixture of movable furniture and fixed seating. The garden's design and horticultural planting give presence to that long desired but never realized aspiration for a botanical garden within Queen's Park, and aligns with the tradition of gardens and heritage parks worldwide. Another garden room occupies the site of the existing defunct fountain near that kind of corner. And Michael's research captured this story, but originally opened in 1957, the fountain was designed by prominent landscape architect J. Austin Floyd. And we've studied the fountain, and while it hasn't worked in decades, it's missing critical parts and wouldn't meet contemporary standards, we believe we can reimagine a fountain that references the original design intent and role within the park on this site. Finally, a quiet moment in the garden is this reflecting pool directly adjacent to the north facade of the legislature building. And here, the intention is not to have a standing pool, but a thin layer of water on dark stone, allowing the architecture to be reflected in front of visitors who choose to pause at this contemplative space. Finally, the running track that rings the park today is a loosely defined gravel path, and the improved running path is immersed in planting. inviting users to walk, run, or find moments of pause within fixed seating along the way. And this is inspired by the leading edge of a successional forest meeting a field. The planting provides a sense of enclosure while remaining porous and connects to these gateways and lawn areas while allowing views in and out. So we've included some diagrams to illustrate some changes to the softscape. So lawn was very popular in the engagement feedback, and we've been working to balance protection of the trees with maintaining areas of lawn in areas where they're loved most. The hardscape remains proportionally much like it is today with minor changes. And the existing oval is shown in black dash line for reference. You can kind of see how the landscape is allowed to push in to the center. So the park has changed dramatically over time, and we see our concept as an evolution of this important place. The design reinforces and supports existing patterns while considering the park's long-term ecological health. It's a place for everyone, a place of welcome, of nature, of governance, and people. And we're in a moment of sharing this vision widely, and we're looking for input on the concept to help us to imagine a better future for Queen's Park. We have work to do, testing and refining the design as we learn more and hear from others. It's a complex site with a layered cultural heritage. It's a civic space and a place of refuge, a place to enjoy nature, and a political demonstration. And the opportunity is great, as is the responsibility. We see potential here to set a new standard for Toronto and ensure Queen's Park North endures as a public space for trees and people for generations. Thanks, and look forward to your comments.
That was great. Thank you. Thanks for coming so prepared, and we're ahead of schedule again, which never happens. So
Presenting a lot.
yeah.
Chair.
Yeah, no, it's I just have a quick question to ask you, Maria. So Pat and Mark will be giving comments as well as the panel, right?
Yeah, just not for vote.
Pardon me,
Just
just
not-
not for the vote. Okay, because I didn't ask them if they were conflicted, but they're part of the university who, or the university panel who owns the land. So I'm assuming that wasn't required. Right?
They're not.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make sure we didn't have to do that. Okay, so we have the next 12 minutes for questions of clarification, maybe keeping in mind, the 5 questions that we've been asked. So I think, okay, Joe has his hand up, and then Sibylla, to start us off. Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. I'd like to learn more, understand better the view looking south from down the central axis. I wonder if the team could put up the rendering, the winter scene looking south with the the cafe in the distance. And specifically on that rendering, I'm asking if you possibly can zoom in. You'll see that a low-rise structure in the distance to the right of the walkway. I'm curious what that's about. And that's a detail, but I'm more curious about trying to understand the design team's thinking thus far about the sequence of moving south, the appreciating the idea of a cafe to the east, but adjacent as described. And then you're met, I think, with a water feature. It looks like you can't walk right through it. You're walking around it, I assume. And then there's what appears to be a narrow path, and you then discover a commemorative garden. And then there seem to be very narrow paths to a dead end, which leads to a reflective feature, and the labyrinth, and the fountain. And I'm trying to understand what I'll call that bottom pie-shaped piece of land adjacent to is it Wellington? No, sorry, I've forgotten that.
Mostly.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. Yeah, Wellesley, yes. Anyway, appreciate any help you could give me with all that, and what is that structure in this rendering? Thank you.
Good question. Thanks, Joe. The structure you're seeing in the rendering this is indicative of perhaps a temporary winter market or something that has been sort of programmed to occupy the site with temporary fires. These are not the council fire in action. But this might be, you know, Sunday afternoon. So more indicative of the type of small scale programming that might find itself at the heart of the park. And so you're correct, you're drawn into the center to the heart of the park, where the terminus is the water feature, the interactive water feature. And then from there will be a moment where you're sort of able to be between the cafe and the garden space, guided into the garden itself. Now, the garden is meant to be something that is approachable from many angles in many different ways. So a lot of it exists beyond the sort of first the tapestry garden portion. It sort of exists within a lot of that lawn and restoration area. And so the idea is that there's a sense of exploration and meander that will allow you to find these moments within the garden space itself, as opposed to a singular body within the park. Do you have anything to add, Todd?
Yeah, only just that the pathways are meant to tie the garden rooms together, and there's also mown areas that you could move through. So there's an attempt at multiple paths through this space.
Thank you.
Okay. Sabella?
I was wondering if you could give me some information on the Norway base, or so many, I don't know, sound like there's a lot of them. And what are the soil conditions that could be tested that?
And
Do you want to go ahead? Yeah, go.
so yeah, the Norway maples are prolific. They're the second most popular tree. 13% of the canopy. So it's certainly double digits. I'll have to get you the exact number, but I think it's in the 30s. Yeah, there's a lot. Soil conditions, we haven't commissioned our contemporary tests, but we have soil tests from previous work, and the compaction is bad. And we've been told that it's not only from heavy park users, the subway itself might contribute to it. So the compaction continues to be a problem.
And that will be part of that long-term sort of management plan, is understanding not only how we care for the trees, but how we care for the soil around them and preventing future compaction from happening. The soil itself is well suited, according, to Dugan's studies, to this idea of an adaptive white oak savanna system. So the soil character that was researched in 2015 through 2019 is suited to that type of restoration planting.
I saw Jim, Olivia, you had your hand up, and Paul, you had your hand up, and Gordon. Okay, Gordon and then Mark. So Jim first, please. Melvin, yes, yeah, the only Jim on the list, right?
So in our information that we received, not in the information that you presented, there was a number of plans that showed what David called U of T Park. University Park. What is the status of University Park, and how does that relate to your design?
Great question, great question. So, I mean, University Park, might ask the city to step in on the status of it, but just to say that we have been working with that team and looking at how these two projects come together and how they can work together to positively benefit what potentially could be an enormous change to the city.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, University Park is, it's in TO core. It's a longer term project that is part of the city's approved plans. It's just not currently funded with a path forward. But as you say, we are working with U of T and their team and trying to make sure that this dovetails with long-term visioning for university.
When you say long-term, is that 10, 20, 50?
I don't think we don't have direction.
Because it can influence if it's a 10-year thing, that's within their design scope.
Yeah, totally. We don't have a timing on it right now. We don't have direction on it from council to advance.
But I mean, it's got.
Can we have direction from council to advance, but it's a large enough first time requires the timeline of the EA first funding, all which should not get in place in the immediate one here.
And the reason it's important, and I'll look at Michael, even the report that he's preparing uses the Tattle Creek and as a response, and is following almost Tattle Creek in design, so it's a big
I
thing.
see both of these things working in
Yeah.
concert. It's just one has funding, the other doesn't have funding, and the other requires an environmental assessment, which has a timeframe for which is complicated. So I see them as working, the teams have been meeting with each other, and it's pretty shared, and the university is supporting both schemes. So I think it all works out really, really well. And in fact, the work I've been doing recently is focusing right in on the park itself, because all the surrounding is dealt with by the university sector and by this university park scheme. Very, very cooperative relationship.
Okay, thank you.
Olivia?
Thanks. I'm wondering if you could talk about stormwater management and what the thinking is, what the plan commission around. Is there sort of an attempt to keep going with that or what's it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of stormwater management on site, you know, it's sort of it is an existing ecology. We know where there are low spots that are wet, and we know where there are low spots where people need to be that are wet, so we need to regrade those. But in general, there's an attempt to modify the soil as little as possible. So in terms of stormwater, we will have an area in the heart of the park where there will be some soil cells capable of accepting stormwater. But in general, the idea is to keep that stormwater on site and to deal with it within that heart of the park where there aren't existing trees. And that goes for, you know, structures as we look towards those as well.
I have a second question about cultural heritage. I feel like personally I find it is sort of a light touch. I'm curious what the intention is behind that, whether there's an intention to start to develop that more. I heard that there were more comments from engagement on that, so is that going to sort of
I mean, I'm gonna pass it to Michael in a second, but only to say is that we've started to, and hopefully it was in the appendix, we've started to look at the idea of the interpretation plan for this park. And there are so many layered histories that have existed within the park, and how we bring that forward and tell that story is really critical. And that's a piece of work that's to come. And it involves, again, continuing work with communities and with the various nations to make sure we've got the right information and that we're telling the stories appropriately. There was a wonderful comment at one of our neighboring institutions working group. I think it was probably from the ROM. And they said, wouldn't it be lovely if you were like a grade 7 student or a student, Ontario student, you come here, go to the Legislative Assembly, you come through the park, and you learn about those stories and those histories, and then you move on to the ROM or to another cultural institution. And it's such a lovely way to think about it. But it's something that we definitely need to dive into. Michael, do you have anything to add?
I could just add that we looked at this park with the previous work, 2015, 2018, and we didn't have to comment on Indigenous stuff at all. There's really no reference whatsoever. And it shows a really interesting shift. Now we're working with Terrence and probably two-eyed seeing about to mix them better together. But that's something that's new in the architecture and landscape field. I think it's really to be rewarding. So I think we want to really work strongly with that idea about Indigenous heritage in the city. And that may actually shock some people in the neighborhood because everyone says, where's that coming from? But it's really important to bring forward. I think also there's so much stuff here for that great interest that we're looking at an interpretation plan. The interpretation plan will want to work with the ROM and the university so that the ROM has so many different ways to look at the cultural heritage of the site. So does the university. And I think, so it's a collaborative piece what we're doing. We don't want to clutter the site with didactic material, but there's different ways we can really bring that forward and looking at QR codes and other kinds of things like that. But I think it's really key point to the site. And one of the drivers, for example, is moving the equestrian sculpture, which is a direct response to explaining the specific heritage of the site. Terrence, do you want to speak to You good?
Set the conversation with First Nations today, and there's enthusiasm for this approach, which is both interpretation, but also almost interactive with practice storytelling on the site and people being present in terms of stewardship and running that programming with us. We're not assuming exactly what that is. We're leaving space for that and we're working at the series, but I think that's going to be a main element that we're essentially.
This is where we're gonna get off schedule for sure. This is a call. You're next. It's okay. No, it's
Yeah,
fine.
I'll only do one of my 4 questions.
No, don't hold back.
No, it's, can we maybe flip this slide? It's my 19 as the below canopy plan. And really, I'm just kind of curious. It may be premature, but how do you manage sort of pet traffic, right? Like the renderings show some really nice kind of wood fences and things like that. And there's dozens of strategies that are employed in different parks. But do you have some thoughts, and can you talk a bit about, are the lawns meant to be open and the restoration areas closed, and the education park is somewhat permeable versus, the hard and the secondary pathways, etc. And how would that be managed? Maybe differently from what's there today?
Absolutely, and Todd's got a lovely drawing about that, which we got. But yes, the intention is that the restoration zones will have low fences associated with them, along with signage to inform people of what's happening and why it's important that they stay out of those areas. Where restoration areas meet hardscape, like at the heart of the park, there'll be a more permanent type of low fence or tow rail. Now, the park is meant to be a living and dynamic place. Again, we have this added layer of care through the governance structure associated with the park. So, if we find in certain number of years that the results have been wonderful inside those restoration zones, we can look at removing the fences. If there are still pressures, those fences will remain. Those ones will be built to last essentially that long, if not longer. So there's an idea as well that those are flexible, and as time moves, we can adapt and change with the park as it is a living thing that is changing. Anything bad?
The only thing maybe I'll add is just the desire lines remain. Like, I think we expect people to move through the park like they do today. But part of the concept too is to keep people in the park longer and maybe offer new experiences and new loops and new ways to kind of stay within the park. So things like the tree walk and the paths through the restoration planting zones are maybe kind of new ways of moving through the park that are not well used today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Gordon, you're next.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This may pick up a little bit on what was just being talked about. I sort of getting the impression that the park is like a patient that is recovering. And I'm trying to get a sense at any given time how much of the park will be accessible to people and how much wouldn't be. And I think that sort of builds, and I apologize if it overlaps what the last comments were. I'm just wondering whether there's been a study where you've got some beautiful views that show change over time. Have you mapped at what point, say, after the park is redesigned, how much of it is available versus 5 years later versus 10 years later? Sort of trying to imagine how this park and all of the things that are being planned to occur in it, how do they, when do they come to be, and when can humans use certain areas, and in what sort of time period?
Yeah, great question, Gordon. I think it is an interesting one, and I think right now we're really trying to balance the lawn that is used both for walking and for other activities with those restoration areas. And I think as we start to develop these long-term plans and understand how these areas will function over time, again, they will potentially change. What percentage are we?
So the park today is 88% lawn, and we're around 42-ish% remaining. So it's about half the lawn.
And so part of that will be that long-term maintenance program that we're gonna have, and understanding that if we're restoring certain areas and other areas need attention, it might need to change. So there might need to be modifications But that's sort of the idea of this as a living place and a place where we're truly giving it the level of care that it needs. So, you know, it's a big task to create such a program and document and to then apply that, but that is the aim.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mark, I noticed you lowered your hand when Paul asked his question. So has your question now been answered?
Yeah, just to leave some time for the rest of the discussion on the limited time. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. And Joe, is your hand up from before, or is that a new hand? Okay, Joe, okay. I think
Yeah,
that's the
sorry.
answer.
Yeah,
That's
from
okay.
before.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, but I think, I'm assuming that's just
It's
the
remaining,
leftover,
right?
a remaining hand, yeah. Okay, great. So, we now move into panel discussion. And keeping in mind the five questions or points of design focus that the city has put forward. And so we have 9 panel members today. So I'm going to go in the following order. Gordon first, Jim Goff second, Olivia third, Sibylla fourth, and then our guests, Pat Hansen, followed by Mark Halle, and then Paul, Jim Melvin, and Joe. I think I got everybody. Okay, so Gordon, if we could start with you, please.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I think of all the parks that the panel has seen since 2007, and it's always a joy to see one where an elevated special sort of care is given to it, especially one like this, which is so important. What I'm going to try to do is to make my comments. I'll try to go through the 5 from 1 to 5. So in terms of general input, I think it's a beautiful presentation. I think that the way you've presented the different strategies that you have, not only do they present the strategy, but they evoke the feeling of what that strategy means walking through a park. So I found that was very interesting, what you did, and certainly the renderings have helped that way. But I think it's very powerful and very evocative because when you're talking about landscape, it is that sense of feeling the air and the temperature that you're and the shade, the cool. And I really think that's great. You've done a wonderful job, and I can appreciate that it's a very complex project as well. So I think in terms of number 1, I think that there's a lot here, but I think somebody said, don't go for 10 out of 10, go for 6 out of 10. And I think basically you should try all the things that are being done here because it's big enough and the need is high enough, not only for the population, but for the park itself, which needs to be remediated and it needs to heal. Input regarding the Washerman Cafe. I think, first of all, those are needed because I really see, and I'll leave my next comment for number 3, but I'll come back to the cafe. I think it's something that's needed. And I'm wondering whether built form, as you've done with the elevated tree walk, whether built form doesn't have a traditional foundation, whether it too rises up slightly. And the structure that holds it is eccentric because it only comes down where there isn't anything under it that you're going to hurt or impact. And that might be able to become part of how built form relates to the natural landscape, as you've done already with the tree walk structure. But I do think the cafe and the washroom is important because the neighborhood's changing. It's not all civic. It's not all research and education. It's people living there, and I think it's really, really needed. Input to the degree of the proposal considers the civic nature. I think that ties right back into it. I think what's really fascinating, and I think moving the horse sort of indicates it, is that this has gone from being I'll call it a colonial, for want of a better word, a colonial political park to one that's social, and that's what really it needs to be. And it sounds like in its history, it's done that. It's gone back and forth. So I think it really picks up on the history of the civics or social nature of the park, and you brought that back again. And I think that's really, really interesting, and I think it's very, very potent. How it proposes responds to the park's cultural heritage. I see it working very well. And again, I go to the heart. You have layered possibilities of different types of ceremonies and different ways to use that social center and then spread it out through the park. And I think that works very well. The tree walk structure, I think it's absolutely fascinating. I think it's needed because as you live on a street, on a porch, and you're 5 feet away from the sidewalk, it's a transition, and all of a sudden you're in a calm space. I think doing this in a park not only helps the trees, but I think it also helps people realize their relationship with nature and that it's not something that's necessarily robust, but it is something that needs to be treated with care. So 1 to 5, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Okay, next to Jim Goff.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. That was great. I think there's a lot of great ideas here, and it's great to see investment at this scale in a park in Toronto. I think I personally would be cautious about overloading the site. You know, to me, parks in a way, one of their key functions is an oasis with lots of space for quiet relaxation and reflection. And with the population that's just going to keep growing around this site, that need is just going to increase. So I wouldn't overdo it. To me, the one thing that really the only negative thing I see is kind of the way the King Edward statue is being proposed to be sited. To me, it doesn't read as like a gateway feature. It feels kind of like a thing that's off to the side. You know, it's like, oh, we got to keep this thing, and what can we do with it? You know. So, you know, if it was me, I would stick it in the middle of the path and have people walk around it as kind of a way to say, you're going into this park. With respect to the council fire, it was mentioned before the team got here that the operations and maintenance plan is going to be very important for the long-term success, and I would certainly agree with that. For the cafe, I think the central location makes perfect sense in terms of pedestrian traffic. It's at the crossroads that I think everybody goes through. You know, when I walk through that park, it's always from southeast to northwest. So that's the perfect place for it. A good place to make people stop and enjoy the park, and having the pictures would be great. I think the operations plan could address any concerns related to safety regarding the washrooms or anything else. Finally, in terms of cultural heritage, I think the commemorative garden does reach back in a very thoughtful way to that period of organized, beautiful design. It was maybe, you know, turn of the century in the 19th to 20th century. So I like those kind of gardens. So I really support that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim. Okay, Olivia, please.
Thank you so much for your presentation and for your package. I just really enjoyed reading and going through it, all the overlapping narratives. It's beautiful, and I really appreciate the respect that you've shown in your design to the existing park that so many people love so much. For me, the most difficult thing about this park is sort of getting onto it. I just find the traffic conditions are difficult, and obviously that's not really part of your scope, but I wonder if you could think more. You paid so much attention to creating this beautiful heart. I wonder if you could pay some attention to how we land on the sort of island, the edges, but specifically, I'm wondering sort of whether there's a hierarchy of where we arrive onto the site. I naturally kind of think of the subway station, but from a traffic perspective, that's almost the most difficult part to arrive on. So I was just wondering how that order sort of works in terms of pedestrian safety as well. I'm sure you've tested out many different positions for the cafe, but I'm wondering if those two ideas of sort of arriving and activating those edges could perhaps work in tandem. In terms of the tree walk, yeah, I really love the idea, and I keep hearing that there's sort of some intention about it, and I wonder if it's just one of those cases that, although it's early, it needs to be pushed farther in advance in order to give information. I know paid a lot of attention to accessibility, so I'm just curious about the width and how that works, if somebody in a wheelchair should be able to get up on there, if there are resting points for if somebody elderly was there and needed to rest along the way. So maybe just a bit more development. Also, if the intention is to walk underneath it, and what that experience is like. From a sustainability perspective, I think there are so many opportunities in terms of the interpretive and integrating education. You know, I find that people are sort of on board with ideas about decarbonization, but when it comes to how critical green infrastructure is and what role that plays, there's not enough understanding about that. So I think there's a huge opportunity to integrate that. TGS has guidance, and of course, not that you're required to comply, but guidance about calculating carbon, encouraging the use of salvaged material, low carbon concrete if you're using it for paving. So I would encourage you to sort of push those sort of enhanced sustainability aspects of the project. And then finally, just a note about engagement. I know there's been a lot of engagement done. I feel like story I'm hearing more about the pushback and the negative aspects. I'm wondering if you could sort of integrate what you've heard better into the presentation, so that I'm wondering if people are not seeing their stories and their ideas told, and if that's sort of told in a more explicit way, perhaps they may be inclined to respond a bit differently to some ideas. Those are all my things.
Okay, thanks, Olivia. Next is Sibylla.
Thank you very much for this really beautiful in-depth picture. It was really well put together, very easy to follow, and I really appreciate the slide that we see to understand like the trees and all the stuff you don't regard as well as textural heritage aspects. There's a lot of layers together on this project. You're doing a great job. It's also really phenomenal to have this kind of like philanthropic kind of donation from the Western family. That's really unique, and it makes this a very special project. The park has a very unique setting, and it's almost surrounded by, I almost feel like they're highways. Like it's really busy. There's an opportunity to park cars against the edge to soften that edge experience. And so when you come into the park, like you've made it, right? And so I think in the design, I think more can be done to help people stay and amble and linger there. When we look at the path system, it's very much a design moving through this space. So what can be done to create a few more loops so that if I come with a baby carriage, I can walk around, or if I want to chat to a friend and do my walks, my steps, I can do that within the space without having to come out over the traffic again. So I think there are some opportunities, but they may not be a very symmetrical design, but I think there are opportunities to create more loops for people to walk around within the site. And the other part of this is thinking about in 20, 30 years from now, so many. And we see the Ravines and Fall really having a tough time. Dogs, people, they're just going down. And so that's not what we want to happen here. This is very much about protecting the weak soul in order to get the canopy from the future. And so I think we may need to do some slightly more drastic moves now to ensure that we get what we want in the future. And maybe it's carving out a big swath and putting silver cells down and filling them with soil, and maybe they're good sod for now, but later it can become hardscape without compromising the roots. So I think we have to dig a little deeper to get what we want in 20 and 30 years from now. We have residential development happening to the south. There's more along River Street. The population demand for this space will really increase in the future. So those are big comments about the actual design of the long piece. The curving canopy pathway, I have concerns about being in the middle of it and not caring about who's coming at me from the other side. So safety is a big concern for me. I'm also worried about the impact of actually constructing it, maintaining it. There will be a lot of destruction to the food zones in doing that. And I wondered, could the cafe be built with an opportunity to get people to get onto the roof and have perhaps closer exposure to the cafe surrounding? I like that all the activities are clustered together. I think it keeps it more intimate, even we're not encouraging large gatherings, even though that may happen from time to time. The cafe, I thought this location could serve to animate that space. I also wondered, is it possible to have a backside to that cafe? So some people might not want to see the activity. They may actually want to sit there and look out over a softscape. So maybe there's flexibility around the size of it. The Norway maples, I really think it's an uphill battle to try and introduce vegetation underneath. I just think we need to be tough on the Norway maples. I think we should, I'm not sure how difficult this is with the intent of the nation in terms of the hardcore save all the trees. You may need to find them as food. This is where I'm sure there's lots of people who speak to how hard it is to have Norway because of its eyes, right? They just feel they can never together we want. In the outcome. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sibylla. Okay, and now to Pat Henson, please. Pat, are you there?
Difficult to unmute myself. Sorry, I'm double muted as usual and forget. Thank you for the presentation. It's really just the whole slide deck is really impressive with the history and the proposal. And I completely, after having spent more time listening to it, and particularly looking at the slide that's on the screen, I think that's page 19 of 56, appreciate the overarching concept of linking ecology and people. The only question I would have about that, and that would be just in the sort of future development of the design is, I mean, my personal predilection would be to prioritize the vegetation and the trees. I mean, I love when I see the dark green and it looks like the restoration zones are about 30% of the larger park. I mean, and there were a few speakers before me that I couldn't quite hear exactly what they're saying. So I may be repeating that, but doing everything in the short term to ensure the long term of this place in the city being a respite, a green respite, I think is in my mind, if there is a balance between the two, that's where the priority should be. I think there's devices that are in the plan that are kind of early days that I would question. I get the ambition around the tree walk. I don't know that, and I get it sort of elevates the kind of, you know, users' experience with the park's ecology. Not entirely sure that a structure like that is ideal. And I would say the same would be true of the kind of very geometric forms that comprise the commemorative gardens. Like, I think in the fullness of time, it would be interesting to see sort of the kind of more organic nature of the park informing those, although I think programmatically they're really important, obviously, to the client as well, or to the donor as well. And then lastly, just again, back to this kind of balance between, you know, the greenness of the park and the amount of people in the park. I can only say that, you know, most users are not that respectful. I think I'd like design a park where everybody gets respectful and manages their garbage, because the more people here, garbage management will be huge. And then particularly with respect to the pavilion, which I think is a great idea. I'm not 100% sure about the location because park pavilions, they produce a ton of garbage. So however that is designed in the future, assume if it's going to be outdoors, it's going to be, garbage bins for recycling and all sorts that will need to be serviced, the small vehicular truck. I mean, I just cannot overstate how garbage can ruin a space like this. So I just think as you continue to work through design, I see there's a lay-by for operation and servicing, but really kind of interrogating how vehicles come in next to the pavilion, or the pavilion be potentially shifted closer to the street. I don't know, but there's lots of work there. And then just garbage containers throughout the site, and actually figuring out how much garbage there's going to be, I think is super important because it could kind of ruin this space. Anyway, thank you. I thought it was a really interesting, engaging presentation.
Great, thank you, Pat. Okay, next to Mark, please.
Okay, thank you. It was really a joy to watch the presentation. It was really easy to process and commendable because it's not an easy site to address. Big expectations, big donations, and they're building into a legacy. So I think building on Pat's comments, I think if we make priorities, I would say the trees absolutely are the legacy of this place. It's the only place, it's one of the last places in the city, maybe even in the country, that gives this kind of treasure trove of trees. And I think that is the element that brings the coherence that everybody will be drawn to this space for. And I think everything else is secondary. And maybe even needs to be honed back a little bit to restore that priority of the trees. The things I do really appreciate is the regeneration approach, the view of the fountain with sandstone bench. I think it was paraphrasing Terence in this notion of truth to power. And you have a building to the south that's the power, and you have this. And I think in a way, the nature, this legacy is the other power that's in opposition to it. And I don't think you need to do much. It's so powerful. It's a sacred grove, and anything that we do that maybe diminishes that status, maybe it needs to be reconsidered or considered more deeply. We're talking about, in contrast, trying to balance the social and the natural. We do have a strong social program in demand, and just questioning this idea of desire. It's a big space. The closest distance, I think, is maybe within 100 meters between the cafe to the nearest street. And that's pretty much the limits of human perception without really not knowing what's beyond. And so whatever you put in the middle, it has to be really good to draw people in from the edges. It's all blind edges around. These are institutional buildings. There's not a lot of edge activation. The streets are busy. How do you get people in here? And the only way is by creating something that really taps into desire. And in a way, I think there's an approach to diffusing these amenities. And I would say maybe we need to put more effort in concentrating them to make that heart even more of a destination. When I saw one of the visuals just of the heart, it looked like a little village. And maybe if that was somewhere strong enough that when you're on the edge at the threshold, you know something's going on and you can see it and identify what it is that you want to join it and make the effort to get there. I think it's a little bit too far, so it has to be really good to be able to draw them in across that distance. And so and I think this notion of triangulation is really important. What is the intuitive wayfinding? And some of the views, if you take the people away in the renderings, I don't really see anything that would draw me in there. It's a space. If there's nobody in there to activate it, I don't see the desire to go in. And I think maybe that needs to be worked on. If you look at the edge of each of these trajectories, what is your eye landing on? And sometimes it's on nothing. Maybe one lands on the pavilion. It could be interesting. Maybe each one lands on something different. It doesn't have to be one thing necessarily in the center. But I think that's an important one. And trying to emphasize these built forms, if they're so good, people will then stay clear of the naturalized areas. And maybe that's a need maybe to make the heart a little bit bigger, the heart surface of the heart slightly bigger to really emphasize that part. And then the other comment I just want to add is safety. And we see, for example, the tree walk, we see the maze, the restored kind of fountain, even the garden. They're kind of cul-de-sacs or passages that leave you with very few options to get off if ever you need to. an emergency or whatever. And I would question them, and if you want to keep them, maybe position them where there is more traffic, just so there's more ventilation through and not stagnation. And I do question though these amenities that are more introverted, like the garden and tree walk. If there's a way that maybe it meets the level of the greatness of the space, kind of sacred presence of all the trees and a large space that you can come together. Instead of kind of diffusing or diluting or eroding this experience, it's something that actually reinforces that experience. So I think that those are the main points. And maybe just one more thing I'm going to add with respect to kind of Pat's comment about the building. Don't underestimate that building. Once you've passed the point of no return and you're committed to it, it tends to get bigger with building codes and servicing needs that you never perceived so at the beginning. So just beware that if you're going to put something there, there's a lot of things that are going to eat away at the space you're trying to create to make that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. So next is Paul.
Thank you. I think I was just saying it's a fantastic proposal. I think the initial big moves are great. The introduction of the cafe, the opening up, the moving of the king, and then opening up the king part of state, and then the broad sort of restoration. Are sort of great parts. And I think ultimately it's about supporting those shared and other side. It's a residential neighborhood now. And so like whatever the kind of community that surrounds it, it's no longer the back of Queen's Park, but it's actually supporting residential community. So we start to think of it differently. It's not only the place for kind of regional events or civic things, those will continue, but what is that? So that makes sense, maybe an absent. I think your work really sets a clear vision, but I think what you're kind of getting to and where I've struggled with it is sort of how is then that vision grounded in some of the technical analysis. So you talked about the soils, people have talked about really detailed. Maybe you've done your tree inventory, but now what's the strategy? And we were talking a bit earlier. My general vibe is that all of these trees were planted in about 1860, and they're all 100 whatever years old. And that's wrong, and they're all going to die tomorrow. And you've got a bunch of 10-year-old trees, and so that's oversimplifying it. But I think somewhere in there you need to make some decisions about which ones are preserved and maintained against all odds, because they're the hero trees versus others that will actually die off. And then how you then aggressively support that renaturalization. I know it's a good terms, but where do you tip your thumb on the scales of natural? And then that strategy then informs the design. So your vision is clear about these elements, but I think that technical analysis and the strategy of how you preserve your lives will inform do you move or rotate the cafe this way or that way. I think I noticed it's there specifically because it's a giant overview that died whatever years ago. So yeah, that's clear, but does it tweak a little? Does it do this? What does it mean for where you put chemical piles and all that sort of stuff? So I think that's sort of the natural step. It's not a criticism, but I think it's kind of where you're getting to. And really it's about that balance between how much you let things evolve and how much you control. And at a certain point, you just gotta get off the pot because you have to put some foundations in the ground. So the natural instinct is to do these radius 3 blocks around the centers of the really mature trees, but knowing that those trees may be gone in 50 years, and so you'll still have a canopy. And maybe you kind of live with that indeterminateness as a kind of positive business strategy. It's like the meandering rivers that leave ponds off to the side, and that's just kind of a natural flow of how things evolve and change. Accept that into your strategy. I think that works for the other elements. I don't know what that means for the formal garden. That's kind of very much a kind of colonial take against it. And so you're going to have these contradictions regardless. But I think informing the vision with this kind of technical analysis and a strategy will help you have a very clear kind of rationale that you can then maybe take this here. So just moving on to some very specific thoughts. I think with the cafe, solar orientation, it does look like it's kind of facing a little bit north, and so I would make sure that it's a nice place to hang out on a day like yesterday. The width of the tree walk seems really narrow. Lots of people talk about September. I'm a little in on the tree walk, maybe to Pat's point. You know, these things work in kind of the full natural parks where there's a strict programming area. I don't know of many examples that are in urban condition. So, yeah, we can't keep the walkways at City Hall open. What do we do in the winter? Are they just closed? Like, we got to get into the nuts and bolts and be honest about that. And I'm sort of like, you know, either you commit to it and then you have to have a robust kind of operational strategy around it and then the wide areas for safety and maybe it's related to the cafe or others, but on its own feels very much as a kind of the signaling in the corner component that could be abandoned rather than an integrated thing. On the restoration strategies, I think, you know, a lot of my stuff is just look at real examples at this point. You know, so the cafe, it's a what for your cafe in Hyde Park, which feels right. And I trust, I think you've got Jim Sackler on for the architecture, do a great job, but yeah, you can have garbage cans, where do they go? From the Savannah restoration strategies at Hyde Park, how do we make sure that this isn't just strewn with orange snow fence and plastic shit everywhere? Need to control burns, who's allowed to go in those areas versus which areas need to be preserved, and you know, how do you do it in a way that's using the materials, maybe that only maple branches on site and the low carbon approach. That's kind of a bit of a circular economy story. I think you got to get ahead of this. Some of these things can be seen if left to not, if you're not sort of integrated at the beginning. And then last part, I just say on the kind of cultural history side, I think moving the king is a big deal, and I really kind of like it, and I think I like the idea of just putting it on the ground and making it a kind of plaything, and one image from the 70s where there's just kids playing hopscotch, and you can kind of imagine kids just banging on this brass thing and the acoustics of it. I think you just gotta lean into that and be like really irreverent and just put the king in the middle of the playground with like a slide on it or something silly that just sort of really says you moved once for Indian and we're gonna move you, and we're not gonna be respectful, we're gonna be kind of cheeky about it. I think even just how it's oriented, where is he looking? Is he looking back at the heart or the council fire? Is he looking at the CN Tower or City Hall? Like there was some kind of incredible symbolism in there, and I think using to tell another layer of story that isn't a cultural, what do you call it? Interpretive strategy that's in the book, but it's a story people can tell for themselves. And I'll leave it at that. I mean, I think you just got an incredible richness and stuff here. Just grounding in some of the reality on the site will be awesomeness.
Thank you. Jim, Melvin, you're next.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for the presentation. Very well done and document was easily read. And I also think we should thank the Weston Foundation for giving us this opportunity and the whole city's opportunity to discuss the health of Queens Park North. And I think that's what I see this project being. And in your presentation, you mentioned that it's a place to stroll and you're trying to give it a little more purpose so people will stay a little longer, but I still think it's an informal forested area that needs a better understood story. So that's part of the health problem, but it's really is informal. There's no formality of tree planting in the place. There's a variety of species that make it an exciting place. So the first priority, and I imagine it's done, but I don't see this reflected in the plan, is kind of a forest management plan. And the forest management plan is not an arborist report. It's looking at the health of the collective of what the space is. And just like Sabella said, if the acer platanoides are a problem, get rid of them. If that should be part of the management plan, and then figure out the space, because you know you're gonna have more sunlight, you're gonna have better things happening on the floor. And then the soil management plan. The plan on the screen, which is your understory planting, I bet you that's not based on your soil management plan. It looks like there would be areas that are more impacted that would not want lawn, and who cares about the percentage of lawn? It's the impacted soil that trying to relieve. And our office at one time did Grange Park, and the solution was, and it wasn't a design for Grange Park, it was a health of Grange Park, and the solution was spread all over the root zone of the trees 4 inches of mulch, and do that every year for like 5 years. And if you did that, that would be this, at least even if there's no design, just do that. That would be great. So the people start to see that kind of idea happen. So then we come to, okay, how do we slow the people down and give purpose to the park? You want to, as a restful place, sit and enjoy kind of place. And some of the control things I see, you talk about seeing the snow fencing to control understory growth. We did the same thing with Dugan and Associates in a park. 5 years later, take it away and you got an understory. But your diagrams show the long linear seating, kind of like a la Central Park. Those are great controls to not let people go into those spaces you don't want them into. So those kind of things would help. And limiting the hardscaping. You actually, I think, if I read it correctly, you go up of 3% in hardscape from 47 to 50 or something. But trying to keep it down. So the elements that are being proposed, then I think there's either more work for you guys moving into detailed design. So the first thing is, well, wait, before I go there, I think it's very important that you people decide whether you're going to work with the University of Toronto Park. If that's the ultimate goal, a lot of the things that we're talking about today is in contravention of that plan. Like if the way Michael describes the old Tattle Creek through there, you might want to recreate that. And if we talk about those kind of things, then some of the decisions we're debating today or discussing today might be changed. I think it's so important. That's the big goal. I can see the landmark landscape of U of T going right into Queen's Park. And if it goes right in, and if you follow it in, it goes right in under where your walking the trees is. So there's a lot of things that I think would change if that is the ultimate goal. And shame on the city if you're not giving them that information, and it's not you. It's but you've got $50 million right here. And if you got $50 million, you can start bending the money towards maybe the western side of this park. And then as you go forward and do the maintenance stuff, it will improve the eastern side of the park. So the rethink in design, stuff like water. If you're gonna have water, does it have to be a splash pad? If it's water, is it as you've got a reflective piece of water, you've got an active piece of water. Can they not be both the same thing? And if you've got water and you want to use what, could it be not something more like Princess Di fountain that would follow the same sinuous line as your tree walk? Would follow the Tattle Creek thing, which would inform your landscape underneath that, more ravine material, not savanna oak material. And so all these bigger decisions have to be made. The gardens, love the gardens, but I think the gardens, it's to me, you're trying to make them a destination in this plan. Like, I would rather see it's an informal space. Have the gardens, have the beauty and the flowers, but make them little off pieces as you walk along the walkway. Not a destination now. Oh, now I'm in the rose garden, or here's a bunch of roses along the walkway, and then you go a little further and you find the James Floyd fountain, and it has a tea garden kind of feel, or so there's more informality rather than a place in the plan, and I don't know where the labyrinth came from. So I can't comment on that. It seems something that is kind of redundant for what this is. It restricts movement. It doesn't seem to fit the plan. In terms of moving the king, I think that in full opposition to your comment. We are. I think the king makes a good entry feature, because that's the forgotten corner of Queen's Park North. There's nothing there. Like it sort of presents the corner, and you're going into this space. And if you look at it in context with the University of Toronto Park expansion, Wellesley Street becomes kind of a dead end, and there would be I'm imagining, I don't know what the plan is, but I imagine they're at the west terminus of Wellesley Street might be a plaza. That's the plaza, I think, a coffee shop should be in. And because then you look at where is it in the whole of U of T? The nearest coffee shop right now is Hart House, or I think they closed one in the library. Yeah. So it kind of ends up being, unless you go to Queen's Park Cafe or whatever cafeteria. So food then becomes a big question, and like we just heard, or from Pat as well. Once you bring food in, you've got servicing, you've got garbage removal, you got more things. So moving the food to the younger edge might make a little more sense. It's too bad that TTC didn't make a washroom and food thing where it is, because I think that would be ideal, because a lot of people walking from the West Camp, the East Campus or the West Campus walk right by that. So then the question of food, let's not do a food pavilion right away. Let's try carts and food trucks on Wellesley Street. It's the same as a food truck in front of Main Toll Square. Just test out the notion. I don't even know if there'd be enough people to sustain a viable business in a cafe there. And if the cafe gets closed in the winter, because or the path's not shoveled in the winter, that you get into more. So this is a question I think the city needs to talk about. What does food delivery in Queen's Park North, what is it going to be? And if it's closer to Wellesley Street, it becomes a little more part of the urban fabric than it does of the park fabric. The gardens, the civic gathering meeting spaces, I think that's ideal. I kind of like the little fire space and all those kind of things. Like I said, I don't understand the labyrinth. The tree walk is one I don't think you need. I don't know where it came from. I don't think it's going to be really the experience of a true tree walk, which usually you go to the Vancouver Botanical Gardens or other places, you're walking through a forest. You don't walk through an urban tree canopy. It's just not dense enough. It's not enough. You're not high enough in the
All the white oak is either just.
branches.
How much is this stuff though? Versus this? Is it up?
Ralph,
He's missing.
Ralph, can you mute yourself, please?
And then the workshop, I don't know what the workshop is for, if it's just another structure. So in terms of, I like you think a lot of how water is delivered, how the pathways flow, Sabella's comment, food, you need to talk with the city. I don't think it needs a structure in the center. I think it needs context of what the finality of that space would be. I think that's all.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, Jim. Okay, and last but not least, Joe, we're a little bit over time, not hugely, but
Yeah,
a little bit.
So just two things. Ralph is also here. I don't know if he's on your list, but
Ralph had to recuse himself. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that. My
Okay.
apologies.
It's okay. Yep.
I just saw his name there. Second
Yep.
is that I've been finding it very hard to hear, especially when there's an online person on and you leave the microphone on in the room. Then there's a giant echo. And so I didn't hear. So my apologies in advance for repetition. I was trying to hear carefully, but it's just circumstances. I think there's a great deal to love about all of this. And I cannot help but reflect on a project I had some involvement with some time ago, which was so benefited by a gift from the Weston Foundation, and that is the Weston Quarry Garden at the Evergreen Brickworks. So, the idea of major private gifts, the idea of exploring new partnerships and exploring innovation is not a new idea, but it's so wonderful to see the kind of baton being passed and the not only the gift for the capital improvements, but the ongoing maintenance. Which leads me to, I think, something that I won't dwell on because many have mentioned it, including the city staff and team and the design team, and that is, the fundamental core of this project is to preserve and enhance and revitalize this incredible urban forest, or maybe urban forest isn't the right term. I'm not sure what the right semantic is, but it's an unusual and special place. And I really appreciate the team's the proposed approach to a restorative landscape. I appreciate many things about that. I appreciate the approach to the edge treatment, particularly that its kind of distinction and an acknowledgement of its adjacency to really major urban traffic streets that aren't going away. But I also appreciate the idea inherent in beginning at a certain place and it being a work in progress. That yes, there's an original vision, but what's so wonderful about the gift and the design concept is that is the opportunity for what I'd call a landscape steward, or a kind of the Friends of the Park, which probably already exists, but the sort of idea of a stewardship program. Somebody mentioned a kind of forestry program, and I think the design team already mentioned being open to engaging further assistance with respect to, the idea of you know all the trees aren't going to be gone in 10 years or 20 years, but that, here's a plan for how that gets revitalized. So that broader notion of restorative landscape, a stewardship program, and people specifically with long-term commitment to the place, that all sounds wonderful to me. I also will say that in my view, the idea of, first of all, the idea of a public washroom facility in the middle of this park is highly desirable. We're all talking about a cafe, but let's remember the first thing I think we're talking about is a public washroom, and we don't have nearly enough public washrooms in the city of Toronto. And yes, you could put a public washroom on the edge. Yes, you could put a cafe on the edge, but that's not where I think the most of the people that are coming to this park are going to be. I understand the challenges of putting a facility like this in the middle of the park. Yes, there's a lot of garbage. Yes, service vehicles have to get to it. Yes, it can get too big if you're not careful. Hence, this issue of the business plan and what are you really trying to serve in a place like this, etc. But it's a public washroom as well as a cafe, whether it's in the precise exact location or not, I will leave to the design team to contemplate. But it does occur to me that its adjacency to the heart of the plan makes sense, and that it in fact happened right from the get-go. I have some areas where I would just say I'm skeptical, and other areas where I just have suggestions about more work. So let me start with the more work. I love the idea, candidly, of a commemorative garden. What I don't like, or not so much, I wouldn't use that term of not like, but think has more possibility, is a reinterpretation of what a commemorative garden might be. What we're seeing here is a very traditional notion of a rose garden, a very particular kind of formal, traditional, I hesitate to use the word colonial, notion of a commemorative garden, and appreciating the welcoming nature, a major principle of this design, appreciating the evolving nature of our community, the indigenous considerations and values that are being put into the middle of this. I find it odd that as you walk south in this park, you are confronted by a water feature. You may or may not be aware that there's something beyond it. If you do get beyond it, I heard the design team say you could get to it from various places, but the design at the moment looks like, kind of hedges that define enclosed landscape zones that you have to make a major commitment about entering. And then there's this kind of dead end condition, or it feels dead end to me, at the larger reflective fountain. So I like many of the elements of all that. I love the idea of a reflected water feature where the north facade of the legislature can be reflected, and assuming that can really be made to happen. I think that's a very powerful idea. But I find that, I'll call it the triangular southern section that comes from either corner to the middle, bitsy, or kind of not cohesive, not integrated. I think that could be a distinct place within the park overall, where there's an evolving idea about commemoration and making room for commemoration in the future. There's a lot of commemoration already. Yes, there's a lot of history, but there's going to be more history. And how does that get accommodated? And I'm just wondering if, instead of a very traditional idea of a commemorative garden, something very visible from the a suite of the Lieutenant Governor. I think that's a lovely thought. But I'm just asking whether the design team can kind of just be maybe a bit more 21st century thinking about what does a commemorative garden mean and look like. Candidly, the tree walk to me feels a bit alien to the idea of Queen's Park North. I appreciate the motivation, but Queen's Park North is not an exhibit as an extension of the ROM or a visit to the Parliament. It's a place of repose in our city. It's a place of transit. Occasionally, it's a place of gathering and protest, but it's not an exhibition space. And the imposition of that elevated structure, I think, will have a major impact on the kind of character of the place that's not anticipated and I don't think intended. And it's just, it sounds to me like, and you've heard this from others, it's going to be one of those things that doesn't get maintained. It doesn't work well in the winter. It poses huge liability risks to the city, candidly, which the city's very aware of. So I'm not sure that's where I would invest. And maybe a final thought is I appreciate working on the 2019 improvements. And I would leave one final thought about beyond ongoing commemoration, ongoing public art program. And some sort of a public art investment that becomes part of this project that involves outreach, a competitive process perhaps, interpretation, I don't know, something that hasn't been done yet that also brings engagement with the broader community. Thanks very much.
Okay, great. Thank you everyone for your comments. I'm going to try to summarize things fairly quickly so that we can get to the vote that the 7 panel members are participating in. So we heard a lot of appreciation for the beauty of the presentation, the feeling, the seasonality, and I think adjectives that were used were evocative and immersive. We heard about the high need for a big park and that there was general support, I think, for the amount of programming. Most people felt the programming was quite good. And there was a lot of appreciation for the cafe and restaurant use, that they are overwhelmingly needed. There was a suggestion for the cafe to perhaps touch the ground more lightly. There was appreciation for the move from a colonial political park towards a more social park, and the thinking that that was a very big potential idea to be built upon. There were lots of comments for appreciation for the different types of ceremony that could be included in the park. There were some comments of caution about overloading the idea of the park, that people count on for it to be an oasis and a place for quiet reflection. There were comments about the King Edward statue being a gateway element or not. There was appreciation as well as critical comments about the commemorative garden. Some supportive comments for it being rendered as you've shown it, as a representation for a kind of moment in time versus looking ahead, and could it be more kind of abstract in nature. There was a lot of appreciation for the respect shown for the park. There were some comments about access to it, acknowledgement of the kind of fast moving vehicles all the way around it. The park is kind of an island. Where are the safe crossings? I think there might be an opportunity for the arrival of safe crossing and the cafe to kind of work in combination. A couple of comments about the tree walk and whether or not it should widen out in spots for perhaps wheelchair turnaround and passers-by. An opportunity to integrate more sustainability approaches. saving carbon and perhaps using reclaimed materials. Lots of comments about the tree health and the soil health. Some technical comments from our landscape architects on the panel. And a particular comment about not only the movement through the park, but people being invited to stay, amble, and linger. And could there be a few more loops associated with the pathways provided? A couple panel members commented about just digging a little bit deeper and being tougher, I think, on some of the ideas provided in an effort to keep the longevity of some things. So to take a bit of a tougher hand with things. The idea of the sidedness of the cafe, because it is viewed in the round, there are some comments about definitely maintenance, servicing, garbage. Is there an opportunity for a more contemplative side where you're not looking at the action, but you're just looking at the park? Could people be invited onto the roof of that structure if to get up into the tree canopy rather than the tree walk? Appreciation for linking ecology and people in the short and long term. Again, underscoring that the trees themselves and the aspect of respite in the park is the kind of primary give back to people. Lots of appreciation for the regeneration approach. And the speaking of truth to power and a feeling that maybe with the sacred grove of trees, you don't have to do too much. Comment about the scale of the spaces between the programmatic elements, perhaps being quite large, so 100 meters, and thinking about the park, the kind of benchmarks, cues for people moving through when there are no people, I think, in the park itself and as explored in the renderings. There's a shift with respect to the surrounding community, that it is an increasing residential community on top of all the other previous uses. So the importance of regeneration again, the idea of hero trees and being able to renaturalize. Additional cautions about the tree walk element and how invasive it might be. The comment about the king on the horse maybe having more symbolic meaning. Where is he looking? I've very much appreciated that comment. The need for a forest management plan. And again, underscoring the soil health being very important and maybe treating some areas as not as precious or gentle as the treatment is being. Benches can be considered a different form of fencing lines. So we heard comments about what lessons can we learn from Hyde Park, with respect to less plastic and more maybe controlled burning as an idea. Can the water elements do double duty? Could they become more didactic elements rather than formal? Lots of appreciation for partnerships and innovation, especially with respect to the forward-looking maintenance. This idea of a kind of work in progress, landscape steward, and friends of the park being great opportunities. And also suggestions for evolving commemoration in the future and us maybe not knowing what those might be, and an ongoing suggestion for public art that could be sort of maintained and suggested through outreach and interpretation. And those are my notes. So next is the vote, please, Maria. So if you
Yes.
could,
Yeah, I will like share.
do I vote? I can't remember. Is the chair vote? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So Maria, do you usually read this or do we need to read this?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Could you read it, Maria, please, for me?
No, it's
Do you mind?
Are there any conditions?
Oh, that's right. Thanks, Paul. I forgot about that. Yes, before we vote, I guess, are there any conditions?
So
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Yeah.
I'm not sure this needs a vote. I think there is general support for the project, but the project is set at such infancy that we do need it to come back and see what the designers will propose. So like, my tendency would be not to vote non-support because I support the project in general, but I do want to have it come back. So how do you, how do you?
I'm not sure this has happened before, but I can understand why you're feeling that way. Because would this vote be support for the project to be done with, I mean, the vote of support is always incorporating all of the notes that we've given as well, Jim, but it's a very big public, civic infrastructure,
So this is a vote for the first review. So I would say if the team is committed to coming back for a second review, I would leave it up to the team if you would like a vote now. Or if you will be committed to coming back for a second review. So it's really putting you on the spot.
We'll come back for sure.
Second.
I think our intention was.
Yeah, I vote for come back.
That be a condition. So
Oh.
There's still work to be done.
Yeah.
Like if I vote for, let's say non-support of the walk in the trees, still, it's not what we're voting for.
Yeah, no, there's still work to be done, and we heard great comments from you today, and we also still have to work with everything we heard from the public and executive yesterday. So yes, there's still work to be done.
Yeah, go ahead, Christine.
So I would suggest that, to have a vote today, and the intent of the vote is to inform the team that you're on the right track and to continue on the track that you're on. We would like to see it again. This is the first review. Or if you're voting non-support, then go back to the drawing board and, there's a real sort of conceptual rework of this project that's needed. So I would say it's a level.
Okay, Jim, it's your
Well,
take.
I mean, further to that, I think if there was going to be a condition, what might be helpful to the team is if that condition just related to the amount of programming that's in the concept. Because some people say they thought, like Joe said, the tree walk was kind of overload. And some other people mentioned the labyrinth, and there were various things. So I would suggest that a condition would direct or request the team, whatever the appropriate word is, to go back and think about the amount of programming in the site.
And I think the whole strategy about the trees is also. And all we make was in particular, I think that's a big people.
May I just comment?
Yes, go ahead, Joe.
Candidly, everyone, I'm prepared to vote. To me, this is not very different from almost every other project we deal with where everything isn't universally liked or disliked in a first review. And each panel member has to make a judgment on balance, whether they on balance support the broad direction of the project, appreciating there's been a lot of comments. And it's an evolution, and we heard clearly this is an evolving process. So I'm okay to not vote, by the way, also. Very happy to not vote. Voting so, but I don't feel a big problem with voting, just to say.
Why don't we vote on whether we should vote?
No, I think that we could use that, like, there's two potential conditions, right? One that we encourage the participants to revisit the mix and composition of programming. We just need to get the exact words. And then another one that it is supported by the force management strategy, something like that. Similar.
Yeah, but I guess a forest management plan would be sort of key component of guiding the other parts.
So we just need to turn those into. So you got something.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
there's two conditions. One is to revisit.
Yep.
One is to revisit the composition of programming. That's very short. The other is, to further advance the forest management change.
Is that okay, Joe, for you? Yeah, okay.
I'm not sure I heard it correctly. I just heard forest management. Of course, forest management. Yes. Give it to me for Christmas. I'll always accept.
Yeah, okay. Okay, great. Okay, so if we can go in the order here, so whether you're in support or non-support, Jim, please.
I would support, and I support both of those conditions.
Okay, great. Okay, Olivia?
It's implicit in support.
I think it is,
Yes.
but I'm struggling a bit. Olivia? Yeah. Support? Okay. Okay, great. And Sibylla?
Support conditions.
Okay. Paul?
Support with the same two conditions.
Okay. Jim?
Or
Okay, great. Joe?
Support.
Okay, great. And Gordon gave support. He had to leave
Yeah.
earlier. So I think that's unanimous support.
Yeah.
So, great. Does this conclude the session?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And thanks for your support.
Thanks, everyone.
to me
Good luck to
in
the
this,
design
okay?
team.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Yeah. Such an important project. I think for